Hello and good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can see and you can hear me. Shall we test some of your microphones just to see if you can actually indeed hear me? Need some volunteers to say yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Carsten, I can hear you.
Yes.
Great.
I can also hear you.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Hi, good.
Thank you so much for joining today's webinar on job interview. And some of you might have worked with me in the past. For those who do not know me, my name is Carsten Such. Management team at von Rundstedt, responsible for what we call the retail business. That means individuals who seek our advice in career matters, people who seek to find a new job or change their job. What I would like to do today, and that is of course subject to your approval, is to give you a bit of theory. So I'm going to try and contextualize the ins and outs of interviewing. What I'll do there is I'm going to reference my own experience, both as a corporate senior executive, as a career consultant, and also as an entrepreneur, because what we will see throughout today's workshop is that basically the success of an interview boils down to a person's or a candidate's ability to linguistically refine and sharpen the ins and outs of his fit. So I'm gonna kind of weave the workshop in and out of my own personal and professional experience as a corporate person and as an entrepreneur. Then in a second part, and that will hopefully be the bigger part of today's session, I will offer some practical exercises for some of you volunteers. As in the LinkedIn information, I said that some of you will have the chance to volunteer to do an interview in front of everybody else. And I will, of course, be a tough interviewer, ask some of those challenging questions, and then, of course, also provide insights and feedback on what I heard. And maybe if I also see you on screen, I'll also provide feedback on what I saw. This doesn't mean that I'll be the only one speaking today. I would very much like to invite everybody to participate. This is not my show. I know what I have in my head, and I know my experience, but I would love to, let's say, give as much of what I know and what I've experienced to you. So please ask me, please stop me, please challenge me if something doesn't make sense, if something went too fast, if you need further explanation. So this is all about you. I'd like you to leave today's session thinking this was great. I really learned something. And then in step 3, we'll have hopefully enough time for Q&A, and then we'll wrap up sometime in an hour and a half, 2 hours from now. Is that okay for you? Or are there other expectations that you would like me to focus on?
That's great.
Perfect.
That's okay.
Just so that you unmuted yourself, that's why I'm asking, saying your name.
Yes, perfect. Yeah, indeed.
Hello? I think somebody spoke, but I didn't.
Yes, sounds good.
Sounds good. Okay, very good. Good. So I did prepare a little bit of a presentation, even though I'm not gonna, let's say, focus on this all that much. I think it is useful to also to give you a bit of a reference point with regards to how do I prepare for an interview? What is the interview really about? Are there do's and don'ts and so on? But I think the majority of today's learning will stem from the role playing, from the actual live interviews that I'll do. Hopefully I'll find a volunteer, 2 or 3 in this group. Because I think being in this process of being challenged in an interview, not knowing what kind of questions will come, not really knowing what should I say and how should I say it, how do I linguistically refine my answers, that is a really long, steep learning curve. And secondly, also listening to other people being interviewed and let's say maybe being tripping over some of those difficult questions, that's also a very good learning curve. So that's what I will try and do with you today. I'd like to start the session with what I call my personal mantra. Oftentimes when we interview, we tend to speak from our own reality. We use nomenclature that is specific to our company or to our industry, and we don't realize that this nomenclature doesn't translate easily to other companies or other industries for that matter. So my personal mantra that I would like you to remember throughout today's session, but also going forward, is that whatever you communicate to people around you, in particularly in your interview, it should be understandable by the person that is talking to you. That means you should weed out any company or industry-specific nomenclature. Basically, what you should try and do is to talk as if you were talking to a child, to make it clear what you are talking about. That's point one. Point two of the mantra is you need to formulate your success stories or your examples in a way that the listener understands the relevance of what you're saying. So basically, the guy that is listening to you should realize that this is relevant to him, that this is important, and that he or she should pay attention. So that's point two. And three, and that's probably the most difficult one, whatever you communicate, in particular in an interview, should be formulated in a way that people can remember it. So what this means is that you need to find a way to distill, to shrink, to condense, to linguistically refine your stories so that they become short and punchy and to the point. Why? Because the attention span of the listener typically is very short. We all have that same problem. And if you imagine listening to somebody else's curriculum vitae, somebody else's success stories and achievements in his or her own language, in his or her own nomenclature, it is very difficult to remember even the faintest aspects. So what I would like you to do is to remember that what you say needs to be formulated in a way that the other person can regurgitate it, basically repeat it to other people, and by doing so, become a salesperson on your behalf. So that's point one. That is a really important one, the mantra. Make it understandable, make the relevance stand out, and make it easy to remember. Be punchy, be numeric and concrete. The more numeric you are, the more concrete you are, the easier it will be for the interviewer to understand whether what you just told him or her is important and relevant. Numbers are really key because numbers help to differentiate. So that's why I would like you to focus on that too. Thirdly, I'd like you to watch your own nonverbal communication, which means the usage of your hands. If it's a physical interview in an office space, your body language, the movement of your upper body, your shoulders, but also your feet. Sometimes when we're stressed, the feet shows the nervousness that we have and so on. So watch for your own nonverbal communication, but also watch for the other person's nonverbal communication, which means get a feel for the interviewer. Try and identify certain patterns in his or her question. That means if he or she keeps on asking questions that target certain numeric evidences, well, the chances are that he's a very analytical person, that he loves details, he loves data, he loves facts. So if you then don't provide facts and numbers and data, he or she will probably not feel the relevance of your answers. If, on the other hand, you have an interviewer who speaks in terms of relationships and social contacts, or somebody who formulates questions around creativity and change and so on, he's probably not as detailed or as process-oriented as the first candidate or the first interviewer was in my example. So then giving that person too many details, too many facts, too many processes probably won't work. So what I would like you to do is to make sure that you watch your own nonverbal communication, but also watch for signals of the interviewer, both in terms of what he or she says, but also the facial expression. Think of this concept of what we call micro-expressions. There are 7 different micro-expressions where the subconscious is triggered and then creates certain movements in your face. For instance, as a reaction to disgust, or as a reaction to interest, or as a reaction to fear and so on. So these are subconscious reactions of your micro-expressions. So detecting them, these micro-expressions in your interviewer, I think is a very important cue to realize, are you still on track? Are you still serving the right kind of purpose? Are you giving the person the right kind of answers? Yes or no? And then also circle back to the interviewer. And as we progress through today's session, and as I will probably hear questions from you, and as I will give answers to these questions, I will always go back to the person who asked the question by saying, did I answer your question? This is what I mean by circling back to the interviewer. Going back after you've given an answer and asking the interviewer, by the way, did I answer your question? So these are some of the main points I would like to share with you and weave through this workshop today as a red thread. There'll be more details following now, but I thought these points warrant a separate page. Are there any questions, any comments as of now? Please do jump in, please do stop me either through the chat or just by speaking up. Otherwise, I'll just move on.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have a question. On the point regarding the numbers, what happens if you don't have really numbers? If your previous job didn't provide numbers?
Mm-hmm. I know that some people find it difficult to identify numbers, commercially relevant numbers, but I can guarantee you there are numbers. If there weren't any numbers, the role probably would not really exist. So it could be, let's say, the amount of visitors that you let into the house. It could be a certain budget that you manage. It could be a number of projects or stakeholders that you manage. Look deeper, because the thing is, what you want to do in an interview, you want to differentiate yourself from the competition. People who probably have a similar background in terms of academic, in terms of professional as you, and who are applying for the same job. They probably will also have difficulties in finding numbers as evidence. Now imagine if you're the only one who has numbers to prove his or her, let's say, experience in that field. So I think I'm going to push back and say, I'm sure there are numbers, you just need to find them. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. Well, I do have numbers in my case, but I don't have specific numbers.
Give me an example. What do you mean? What are you doing?
Well, I was working in a customer care department or managing process problems. So I can't tell how many customers I satisfied or dealt with or whatever else. So I can say there were hundreds or thousands, but I can't say it's this amount and I did satisfy this percentage and so on.
So then my question to you would be, how would your performance or somebody's performance in that field be evaluated? What are the KPIs?
You could mention your service level agreements in such kind of jobs, I guess. So you have some kind of reaction times and everything like this. Just an input from my side.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it wasn't measured like that. It was more. We didn't have a measure on that. But I can think in this direction. Yeah. Okay.
So what about a reduction in complaints, or an increase in speed to respond, or maybe a question of efficiency gains, fewer people supporting more customers? So again, somewhere along those lines lies your specific numeric evidence. And what I'm trying to get to you is to say, look for those numbers. They always exist, because if they didn't exist, the job wouldn't exist, because somebody has been paying you. And the reason for why the person has been, or the company has been paying that job probably lies in these KPIs. You just have to find them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. So before you move to the interview, there's one additional key aspect that I would like to have you take away from today's session, and that's the concept of pain points. I built my own company in 2013, and I got private equity funding for it. It took me over a year to get the investors to believe in what I was doing. For the first year, my concept was very clear in my head, but what came out of my mouth wasn't strong enough, wasn't clear enough for the investors to say, well, hallelujah, that's a great idea, here's my money. In the process of talking to numerous investors, I realized that some investors or investors would be differentiating opportunities as either headache pills or vitamin pills, which means some companies are seen like headache pills because they solve a certain headache in the market, whereas some other companies are more like vitamin pills, which means, well, I'm not really that sick kind of thing, so it's a nice to have. So in the case of an interview, what I would like you to think about is to position yourself as this proverbial headache pill and not as a nice to have vitamin pill. But the thing is, there are 35 types of migraine, So which type of headache pill are you? You need to understand the pain points of the company. Otherwise, you're looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack. And identifying these pain points probably will require talking to people in these target companies prior to applying or prior to going to an interview. These pain points are typically not part of the job description. They're probably typically not part of the company's website, yet you need them to fine-tune your profile to fit the pain points as this proverbial headache pill. So that's an important concept, and I'm going to come back to that as we prepare for these role plays. Please remember, you need to understand and let's say also verbally, acoustically formulate the pain points for yourself to then use that information about the pain points to formulate your stories. The next thing in terms of preparing before an interview is preparing questions. People like me, I've done, I don't know, thousands of interviews in my life. We like to evaluate a candidate based on his or her thoughtful questions. So what you should not do, what should not happen is that the interviewer gives you the opportunity to ask a question and you say, oh, no, I'm fine, I don't have a question. Apart from the fact, how much will I earn and will I have a company car? And by the way, I would like to take a sabbatical. I'm trying to be funny. So what I would like to do is to suggest to you, to recommend to you that you prepare, let's say, a dozen types of questions prior to the interview. Why prior? Because if you're sitting in the interview, typically the stress level is so high that the really good, thoughtful, deep questions probably won't come. May I suggest 3 different categories of questions? Strategic questions, organizational questions, and tactical questions. Depending on the level, the hierarchical level of the job that you're going after, the company might want to see your ability to formulate strategic questions. So one example could be, dear interviewer, could you give me an example? Let's say I read that your company has merged with this Chinese joint venture partner. What impact will this merger have on your product pipeline? So that's a classical example of a strategic question. The organizational questions could focus on aspects around organizational culture or leadership. So a question could be like, how would you describe good leadership in this organization? And then third bucket of questions would be the tactical questions. And here you find all the stuff like, is this a new position? Is this a replacement? Where did the incumbent go? What's the budget? What does good look like? What needs to be achieved in the first 90 days? What does it report to? And so on and so on. So I would recommend that you structure these questions prior to going to an interview, and maybe you'd write them on a piece of paper and put that paper next to you. So the interviewer from the corner of his eye will see that you have prepared questions, which is typically a sign that you are interested in the company. So this kind of helps sell your candidacy. Point 3, make sure that you have your success stories ready. If you've understood the pain points, if you've understood the job description, if you've understood the job description to the point that you know what the competencies are that they're looking for, you are probably well advised prior to the interview to think, okay, now if this is the competency, let's say change management or customer service, what success stories do I have to fit those competencies and prepare those to fit the pain points and the competency needs before the interview. And last but not least, even though it sounds pedantic and rather, let's say, banal, plan your trip. You don't want to be late. It's not a good argument to say, sorry, I'm 20 minutes late because the SBB, I missed the connection of the SBB. That's not a good answer. Equally, dress code, even though this is a bit more légère nowadays, but you don't want to seem overdressed or underdressed. So you don't want to be coming there with a tie as a man if everybody else sits there in a t-shirt or the other way around. People will not hire you because you're wearing a tie or because you're not wearing a tie. But what oftentimes happens if you feel yourself overdressed or underdressed, you have, let's say you're using or losing energy because of the anger that sits in you, and you might not be as exuberant, as dynamic, and as convincing in your stories as you otherwise would be. And finally, if only I could see what it says on my slide here. Can't move it. Can I move it? Sorry. And finally, another good trick is to identify who will you be interviewing with. maybe you know the name. If you're lucky, the company has shared the name of the interviewer. Doesn't always happen. Try and find that person. Google him or her. See if that person exists on LinkedIn. Study the profile. Maybe you find commonalities. Maybe you both like sailing or playing tennis, or I don't know, maybe you collect stamps. Anything that creates a link outside the purely professional dimension might be helpful to build a bridge between you and that person. So these would be my recommendations prior to going to an interview. Are there questions or comments?
Michael Miller speaking. I have a question regarding the dress code.
Mm-hmm.
Being in the situation, coming to somewhere with a tie and tie and very formal dressed, and there is a bunch of people in t-shirts, and reacting on as a job requester. Oh, sorry, I missed the dress code. I didn't got the dress code. May you allow me to give up my tie, for example?
Exactly, that's exactly right. So what I would say, I would turn this into a humorous situation.
Yeah.
I would say, obviously I seem to be a little overdressed here. I hope you don't mind me taking off my tie. And while you're saying that, you basically take off your tie, you unbutton your shirt, and kind of you loosen up the situation, and you turn it into something humorous. And probably what it will do, it will connect the interviewer and you on a more personal level. So exactly that's what I would do. Yes.
Thanks.
Question. In these days we have COVID, so very often the interview is taken on by the video.
Yes.
And especially in the early stage, sometimes it's just telephone call, or sometimes it's video call.
Yes.
So what is the current situation is like? Does it mean that if they invite you for face-to-face interview, that means you are more about to succeed? Or
no, not necessarily. So we have had examples where candidates went through 2, 3, or 4 rounds of interviews on the telephone or Zoom, or let's say some kind of online video system. It is true that the final round typically still takes place in person, because they want you to come in and experience the facilities. They do want to get a sense of your energy and so on, which via video is only possible to a certain degree. But it is common that the first 1, 2, 3 rounds, maybe even 4 rounds of interviews take place on video. But I wouldn't assume that just because you were invited in person that you were about to expect a contract. Did I answer your question?
yes.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shudrita. I have a question, if I may.
Go ahead.
This is regarding the pain points. Now, normally, if the interviews are with the hiring manager and as well sometimes with the stakeholders, because it's important that you align with the stakeholders. Now, if the pain points with stakeholder, not in the direct line, should we address similar whatever would be familiar to this person of a different function, or should we try to keep it to the function I'm trying to work with, so to get the link for pain point? So
as a general rule, I would only ever give an answer to a question that I was given. I would not try and cross-reference and so on. I would basically be very much focused on the question that I got. So if you had a conversation with another person in a different interview before, you might make a reference. I'll show you. Let's say I'm going to role play with myself in a second, just to showcase what I'm trying to say. But I would be very specific in always answering the question that was put forward to you, because people might think that you didn't really listen to their question, and you want to give some kind of answer that doesn't really fit. So they might think, maybe he didn't listen just now. Maybe he never listened. Oh, if he never listens, he might be difficult to lead. Oh, I don't want a person who's difficult to lead. You're out. So in role playing, let's say if you want to reference the conversation you had with a different interviewer, you could say, again, I'm trying to role play with myself now. Let's say the interview question is, Karsten, could you give me an example of where you initiated change? It's a classical behavioral interview question. What I, as a candidate, could then say, yes, I have 3 examples. In my interview with Bob yesterday, I shared the example of Brazil. Maybe I'll share the example of Argentina with you because I think it's equally relevant for the job that we're talking about. So what you do there is you showcase the fact that you have a lot of examples.
Mhm.
You also showcase that you kind of co-manage the process by indicating, I talked to Bob yesterday about Brazil, and you also showcase the fact that you are customer focused. You are giving an answer that is interesting and relevant to the interviewer. So it's customer focused that you're also showing. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
By the way, I hope you all are hearing me that I keep on repeating my question. Did I answer your question? So that's what I mean by circling back to the interviewer. Because the worst thing is, maybe going back to why this is so important. Oftentimes interviewers, line managers, don't do more than 3, 4, 5 interviews a year. They have a small team, so they're not very used to interviewing. They might be nervous. They might feel, oh, I have to make a good impression. I need to look like a tough leader and so on, but how on earth will I ask these questions? I'm not used to this. So then they formulate questions that are long-wounded and complex and endless. And you're sitting there and thinking, what on earth was the question? So there are two tricks. One way to make sure that you understood the question is to say, dear interviewer, may I just repeat your question? I just want to make sure that I got it. Point 1. And second is what I just said. You answer the question and you say, did I answer your question? And there are 2 possible outcomes. The interviewer might say, yes, Carsten, thank you very much. You did answer the question. Or he could say, well, Carsten, as a matter of fact, no, you didn't answer my question. And then I would say, oh, I'm very sorry. Maybe I misunderstood your question. Would you mind rephrasing your question? I would like to try again. Because the worst thing is that you give an answer to a question that wasn't put forward to you. You think you did a great job and the interviewer thought, what an idiot. Yeah. So always circle back. You only have that moment to sell yourself and you want to max it out. You want to make sure that you increase the likelihood of giving them all the good examples that speak for you. Did I answer your question? No, actually, that wasn't a question. It was a comment on my side. Good. During an interview, the first impression is really key. I mean, you don't need me to tell you this. We at Von Rundstedt, we teach what we call the 90-second pitch. The 90-second pitch is typically the answer to the first question in an interview. Welcome, Carsten. Thank you for joining this interview. Could you please introduce yourself? So when you hear this question, you know, they're looking typically for this 60, 90, 120-second self-introduction. The self-introduction is really, really, really key. That's why we also spend so much time and focus on helping our clients wordsmith these 90-second pitches so that they sit, that they're linguistically refined, and that they also hit home and address the pain points. By doing so, by preparing this 90-second pitch, by presenting yourself, by sitting up straight, by making sure that your body language is appropriate, what you do is actually you appear to be conversing with the interviewer on eye level. Typically, there's a gap for some strange reason in an interview between the interviewer, who sits higher, and the candidate, who sits lower. There's no real reason why this is the case, because it's a demand and supply situation. Both sides depend on each other. Yet, oftentimes there's this gap. So what do you do to close that gap? You can't ask the interviewer to come down. He or she's not going to do that. So what you need to do is you need to actually go up and increase your position. And so you need to find ways to work and to converse with the person on eye level. You do this by listening carefully and being prepared with questions. So what you do is you get a question, you answer your question, that question, and rather than waiting for the next question to come, you reciprocate with your own question. I'll give you an example to showcase what I mean. Let's say the question is, Carsten, could you tell me what your boss, your last boss, would say about you and your leadership skills? And then I would kind of describe what my former boss would say. And then rather than waiting for the next question, I could say, so how would you describe good leadership in this organization? So I'm turning this question, answer, goodbye kind of scenario into an interactive session. And what happens is you turn an interview to a conversation, and when you get that done, you typically win. So you need to respect the time, and of course make sure that you understand what the next steps are. I would not undersell myself by begging to know when and how you will be informed, because if you undersell yourself, the interviewer might think, this Carsten guy, he's not really convinced of his own candidacy. Maybe I oversaw something, maybe the others are better. So you do want to be persistent in terms of understanding what the next steps are, but please remember not to undersell yourself. I'll stop here and see if there are any questions regarding during the interview part.
Hi, Carsten. I do have a question. It's Aneta.
Hi, Aneta.
Hi. Just taking into account what you've said, A, about the 90-second pitch, and B, about being the headache pill for the pain point. Mm-hmm. Do I correctly assume then that your 90-second pitch should then be prepared with those pain points in mind?
Yes.
If it wasn't in the previous time, because generally it's a standard thing.
Yes, yes. So I'm going to try and contextualize this. I'm going to try and be funny. So bear with me. If, let's say, a family of husband and wife and 3 kids, 2 dogs and 4 cats goes to the Mercedes dealership on a Saturday to buy a new car, the Mercedes dealer is not going to come forward and say, oh, hello, welcome. Would you like to buy a 2-seater smart car? It could be that the smart ends up being the car that they buy, but if he sees this big bulk of people and cats and dogs come in, I think it would be a good idea to understand who is driving the car. Is it a short distance or long distance car? How many people normally sit in the car? Do they always bring all cats and dogs? So it's identifying your story and the product that you're selling to fit the pain points. Does it make sense, Aneta?
Yes, thank you. Thanks.
Good. May I continue?
Yes.
The next 2 pages focus on the do's and the don'ts. Yes.
May I just ask, can you give another example of how you reciprocate question without it seeming impertinent since it's like almost the beginning of the interview? You know, that I don't want to create the wrong impression that here you are already taking the stage.
So I'm not sure that I understood the content of your question. Could you repeat, please?
Okay. First of all, if you could give another example how to reciprocate a question. And the second thing is whether there is a danger that if you reciprocate a question, whether the interviewer might think that you're impertinent or taking the stage in a very early stage of the interview. Will it reflect bad on me?
I'm going to start with the second part of your question. Yes, that can be. But this can be would happen as a consequence of your how, of how you do it, not the what you do. So if you basically take center stage in the beginning of the interview, if you basically try and corner the interviewer, and let's say if you have a pompous attitude, if you take too much space, then probably the interviewer will say, interesting candidate, he's trying to push me aside. Let's see who is the stronger person here. So I don't think that this would be a good idea. I think this reciprocation with your own questions is something that you ease into as the interview progresses. The first thing is, and that was something that I mentioned on the very first slide, you need to get a feel for the interviewer. Is this an extrovert? Is this an introvert? Is this a thinker? Is this a feeler? Is this a detailed person? Is this a creative or sensing person? So depending on the interaction, you will see whether you can then go and maybe even make a joke. You can reciprocate with questions and so on. But this is a product of getting a feel for the interviewer. And again, I think the idea would be to turn an interview into a conversation. And so the natural progression would be to reciprocate with questions. So this was my attempt to answer the second part of your question. The first part of your question was with regards to how to reciprocate. Let me see if I can find an example. So if the question were, Carsten, could you give me an example of where you had to overcome internal resistance? Then I would overcome, I'll give an example of a difficult situation where I had to overcome internal resistance. And then I could reciprocate with the question, may I ask you why you asked that question? Is there something in this role that requires a lot of, let's say, multi-stakeholder management? Am I answering your question, Yael?
Yes, thank you.
Was it useful?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Any other questions, or can I move on? I guess I can move on. So the do's, active listening. It's a big, heavily overused word. We work with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people every year, and most people say they're active listeners. Statistically proven, this is not. What this means basically is that you pay attention to the acoustic sounds that you receive, so the content-driven parts of the question that you receive, but also that you pay attention to the verbal, the non-verbal, the facial expression, the energy of the person in the room. So this is not just listening with the ears, it's basically opening up your entire sensory system to get a feel for the person and then create a bond, a reaction, a link to that individual. Why is that so important? At the end of the process, let's say there are two final candidates remaining. Both candidates can probably do the job from a functional and from a content point of view. But the question that the company will then ask itself is, do I want to see his nose or her nose every day? Which one of the two will I choose? So the decision probably, ultimately, will be taken not just on a functional, but also on an energetic, on a gut level. So this active listening requires that you feel into this the person in front of you, which also means, and that's an absolute prerequisite, you need to have your stories prepared. I've trained thousands of people in storytelling. I can tell you from my own experience, without preparation, I have never seen anybody who communicates a convincing story. So if you don't prepare your stories before going to the interview, you will probably not, let's say, have the biggest impact. And you will use so much of your energy and your attention span on your own storytelling that this active listening part will probably fall short. If you are in an interview where there are several participants, you need to make sure that you're contacting all of them. Not just talk to one and basically turn your back on the others. Talk to them, involve them, make them nod, make them, let's say, create a bond with you by nodding, by reciprocating with questions, something. So you need to get them involved. You need to appreciate the company's success, your company's success, maybe even the company that you're applying for. You need to be respectful to your former employer, which also includes your boss. Be respectful. Also, and in particular, if you lost the job because of restructuring, outsourcing, offshoring, what have you. So the interview is not the space to finally, excuse my French, bitch about your former employer or boss. Because what happens to the new interviewer, or let's say the hiring manager of the new company, they will think, interesting. That guy is talking bad about his former employer or his former boss. The moment I hire him, he's going to do the same thing about us and about me. I don't want that. Don't interrupt. In the Western world, different from other parts of the globe, we have a tendency to cut our interviewers, or let's say the person that we talk to. Sorry, that was a complicated sentence. We have a tendency to cut the sentences short of the people that we're talking to because we feel that what we say is more important than what the other person is saying. So the interruption is not a good idea. First of all, you might miss important cues or parts of the question. And secondly, what you're doing there is you're showcasing your client focus. And many roles have as a core competency the ability to focus on clients. Be prepared with questions. I mentioned that before. And generally be prepared in terms of positioning, facial expression, storytelling. It's a big word, being prepared. What it means is you need to have your stuff, the pain points. You might make a mental note. I need to speak slowly and clearly. I should acknowledge the interviewer's question, something. So really set your mind in this stressful situation to be prepared. Make sense?
I have a question.
Sure.
This is regarding the contact to all participants. I think the reality is nowadays you have a lot of interviews online. So if you have multiple participants on a Zoom call or a Teams call, do you have a suggestion how to do this? Because you really never know if this other person is actually engaging or he's having a technical problem or...
So if you are on the phone or on a video call, you need to make sure, remember that I said you need to circle back to the interviewer, that the person is still connected. It happens to us all the time. We sit in the train and we lose the connection, and we still talk and talk about our story, and the person on the other line was disconnected 10 minutes ago. So what I would recommend is regularly to say, can you still hear me? Is the connection still okay?
If you have multiple.
That's point one. Point two would be, have a pen and a paper ready, both for a telephone or for video interview, and write down the names and the locations where they sit. If they don't tell you up front, we have Peter, Paul, and Mary sitting in New York, Tokyo, and Rio, then ask, may I ask who is on the call today? Aha, Peter, aha, he sits in New York. Aha, Frank sits in Rio, and so on. And then you give your answers, and then you direct the circling back questions in a way like this. Is this understandable, Fred, also from an Argentinian point of view? Or you could say, Mary, with regards to New York, is that a clear enough indication of what I did? Or is a story that would fit to your situation in New York? So sometimes you only have one dominant interviewer and the other ones are silent interviewers. But you want to make sure that they also, in inverted commas, fall in love with you. So you need to circle back, and you do this ideally by asking them directly.
Thank you.
Does that help? Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
Carsten, I have one question, please. You told us at the very end you have to make a choice between two candidates, and if I understood well, you said you have to make an energetic choice, correct?
I didn't say I have to. I said that there's a tendency that at the end of the process, the last two candidates can probably do the job equally well from a functional point of view. But the question is, on an energetic, on an emotional, on a personal, on a human level, whom does the company prefer?
Sorry, I don't get it. What do you mean?
Okay. So of course you need somebody who takes care of the job that you're applying for. So the interview process starts with, let's say, 100 CVs. The talent acquisition manager has to go through these 100 CVs, exclude 90 CVs because they don't fit, invite 10 people to the physical interview or the virtual interviews, whatever, go from 10 down to 8, down to 4, down to 2. And so the last 2 or 3, as I said, they are probably equally good in terms of the functional capabilities for the job. And my argument is that the functional capability is not the only decision-making element in an interview. So candidate 1, 2, and 3 can all 3 do the job, but do we want, let's say, him or her? Who of the 3 last candidates touched us emotionally? With whom do we really want to work? The first guy seems to be very clever, but a little dull. Is that somebody who fits to the team? The lady, she is overly active and bubbly. Is that good for the team? Or her German is not so good. So there will be decisions made not just on the functional fit, but also on the human connection. And my argument is, just to conclude my answer, make sure as you go through the interview process, that you not just give them the functional answers to their questions, but that you also showcase who you are as a human being, because ultimately the decision will also include the human dimension, not just the functional capability.
Very interesting, because recently I had an appointment. Since I didn't know the people in front of me, I didn't want to be real. I was very quiet, and normally I'm not so quiet. I'm very dynamic and so on. So I wanted to be not someone different, but to be very calm, very quiet. So it's very interesting, your point. It means if they wanted somebody very dynamic, I didn't show it.
Mm.
And again, one of my key points from 20 minutes ago was you need to feel the interviewer. What an interview does, or let's say the entire hiring process, is nothing else than a sales process. And the sales process is only successful if it is only about what the buyer wants and not what the seller wants to sell. So you need to get an understanding for who the buyer is, what drives the buyer, what type of person is the buyer, and so on and so on. You need to feel that buyer. And the buyer might be somebody who is very much into details. So you need to feed him with details. He might be somebody who is very much on the social, interpersonal level. So you need to feed him with that. It might be somebody who is actually very concrete. It might be somebody who showcases his personal interest in his family. So if you have a family yourself, maybe you want to weave in a couple of examples of your own family, because all these things will help you connect. And my argument is that at the end of the process, it's also about this human part. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Let's move on. Thank you for your question.
Can I have a question?
Sure.
Can I ask one question? Is it proper to connect people via LinkedIn once you get the first interview? For example, I have first interview with the HR manager. Is it proper? Now I try to collect the CFO or CEO from LinkedIn or not, in order to have more information about the company which might recruit you. Is it proper to connect people during the interview process?
So yes. What I would, again, it's a sales process, and pretty much anything that helps you sell is, in inverted commas, legitimate. You, of course, you don't want to get on people's nerves, but let's say if the CEO, sorry, I'm going to go back. The people that you will see in the interview process, I think it is very legitimate to ask them to be connected on LinkedIn. They might choose not to do that, but at least you've tried. Sales is about trying. If you don't try, you obviously won't get. So if you send them an invitation, they might not accept the invitation, but they might do. What you could do in an interview, you could say, as you leave the interview room, you could say, dear interviewer, thank you so much for this great conversation. I really enjoyed myself and I learned so much about the company. Would you accept my my LinkedIn invitation? Again, this is an idea to connect more on a human level. So the answer to your question is yes, I would try it. Would I send a LinkedIn invitation to the CEO of a company? Let's say if I'm applying for a junior level at UBS, would I send the CEO of UBS a LinkedIn request? No.
Thank you.
Did that help?
Yes.
Carsten, I have also a question as a reaction to Frank's question before. If I would be asked, I would tell Frank, be yourself. Would you, Carsten, agree with me?
Be yourself?
Yes.
Well, that's an easier thing to say than to do. My experience is that authenticity is probably the most difficult thing that any human being is doing. Again, people say you need to be authentic. What does that actually mean? An interview situation is, no matter how trained you are, no matter how often you have done it, even as an interviewer, it's a stressful situation. So being authentic in that stressful situation requires quite a bit of mindfulness. So yes, the answer to your question can only be yes, try and be authentic. The question is to what degree will you be successful?
Okay.
People like me who have done thousands and thousands of interviews in their lives, and there are many. I mean, the higher up you go in the hierarchy, the more interviews people have done because they have huge teams and they're part of these large processes. Forgot my train of thought, what I was saying. I forgot my train of thought. The interview.
You said to be yourself.
Thank you very much. I should take notes of my own stories. So I guess as you go through all these processes, as you learn how to pay attention to subtle signals as an interviewer, you also realize this guy was not authentic. He was playing a role. He was pretending to be somebody he wasn't. So the more experience your interviewer has, the less likely it is that you will get by trying to be somebody whom you're not. And the authenticity is, let's say, more important in some areas and less important in other areas. One big important area is, for instance, the reason, why have you left your previous employer? Or why do you want to leave your current employer? So if you have been let go, or if you are in garden leave, or if you are in the process of losing your job because of restructuring, outsourcing, offshoring, and you've been with this company for 20 years, the answer that you give to the question, why are you planning on leaving a company, can't be, well, I've been there for 20 years. I've always wanted to move on. I think now is the time. People like me will automatically say, I don't believe a single word of what I just heard. And then I'm going to start digging. And if people that have experience in interviews start digging, they typically find other levels, other layers that the interviewer was trying to hide. And if then I disprove or prove the candidate wrong, or even worse, I prove that he or she has just tried to lie, he's instantaneously out. So yes, be authentic, but it's a big word. Sorry for the long answer.
Thank you.
Don'ts. Obviously, not being prepared. Obviously, I don't want you to lie. Trying to camouflage the reality in important, in relevant, in existential aspects, lying is not a good idea. I would always try and inflate my story to make myself look more attractive than maybe I am, but I would fall short from lying because that ultimately will pop up and obviously will mean that the end of the process for me has come. Lacking self-expression, not having an own opinion are also clear don'ts. That means if the person pushes you on understanding what your own position or your own opinion is, you need to be able to articulate that. You shouldn't be too categorical. So you also, let's say, need to prepare what this means to have an own opinion. Let's say if the question comes up, what do you think about the current democracy crisis in America, which is not a very typical question in an interview, but it could be a question for somebody who applies for a job in strategy or in communications or in public relations. So there you would find these questions. So answering that kind of politically touchy question requires a bit of preparation, and you need to make sure that you have your own opinion and that you articulate it in a clear but non-confrontational way. Don't be critical and don't show your bad feelings against your former employer. I'm just going to build on that. What I also wouldn't do, and I'm going to try and be funny again, which in a virtual session is not that easy. So what I would not do is to say, my last boss, God, he was so great. He was the best boss I ever had. I will never, ever have a better boss than him. No? Sounds nice because you're praising the guy, but the new boss will say, really? You think I'm going to be a worse boss than that guy? I don't think I want you. No? Don't be impatient and don't be overly emotional. Being emotional is an okay thing. I'm going to role play this now, but don't be overly emotional. So for instance, you could say, some of you might know this U-shaped change curve. So you could say, well, I used to work for UBS. I've been there for 10 years. I really loved working there. And then the company went through 3 major restructuring waves, and I survived each one of those previous restructuring waves. Last January, wave number 4 came and it hit me, and I signed a termination agreement. It really touched me. I was really hurt. I was sad and upset that I had to leave the company. But in the meantime, now 5 months later, I've come to terms with it. I think I have created closure. I'm really looking forward to a new opportunity, and I'm really, really happy and excited to be here today speaking with you, because your company and your job totally exhilarate me. Make sense? All these little things, these little tips and tricks that I'm sharing with you, they need preparation. I know that I'm bombarding you with a lot of elements here. I don't think it works if you don't prepare. So I'm sharing these with you because I want you to reflect on them. And as you go into the interview process, I would like you to sit down and think, okay, now, how do I prepare? How do I, let's say, work on self-expression? How do I make sure that I can divulge my own opinion without being, let's say, confrontational? How do I show aspects where I can be emotional without being overly emotional? So the idea is to prep these with your partner, with your friend, with your neighbor, with other clients, with whomever. But without preparation, of course, with the von Rundstedt team, without preparation, it's just very difficult. Okay, debriefing. After every interview, what I would do, I would write down on a piece of paper or on my iPad the elements of what was discussed in the interview. The question that you got, your answers that you gave, the feeling that you had, stuff that you learned. Because it can be, in some companies, they go through 5, 6, 8, 10 interviews over a course of 4, 5, 6, 8 months. And it could be that the last interviewer is, let's say, the COO or the head of the department. And the only question that guy asks is, Karsten, you've now had whatever 8 interviews over the last 8 months. What did you learn about the company that you didn't learn, that you didn't know before? If you don't reflect after every interview, if you don't go back to these notes before you go back into the next interview, you're probably not going to survive these kinds of questions. Point 2, I would recommend that you mail to the interviewer a thank you, typically 24 hours after the interviewer. You also want to inform the headhunter if that person was involved. Dear headhunter, I had a conversation with Peter, Paul, and Mary. I like the conversation. I'm still interested, or I'm actually more interested. And then make a short comment in your action plan, done this, done that, done that, what are the next steps, and so on. What you want to do is you want to stay on top of the interviewers or the company's agenda. You want them to remember you. And you also want to be, let's say, lively in their memory. So what you can also do is then, after your thank you email, you might actually want to send another email, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks after the interview. Maybe as you're waiting for them to get back to you. And that second email could say, dear interviewer, following our interview that we had 2 weeks ago, I came up with these 2 subsequent questions and I would appreciate your answers. I'll happily come by to your office and so we could discuss these answers over coffee. Let me know, kind regards. So you want to go back and position yourself on top of mind. It's a sales process, as I keep on repeating. And sales works if you stay on top of mind. Is that clear? Does that make sense?
Karsten? Yes, Mele, can I have first questions?
Sure.
May I have the first question?
Go ahead.
Yes, normally we assume, because I guess most of us are from big companies, normally we assume that your future interviewer will be a big company or international company, and you are experienced first round, second round, third round, etc. But they could come from also different type, like your opportunity could come from different types. For example, startup. For example, private company. So their structure will be very different. Like they will have a small company, you know, and not so many hierarchy. So what should we behave differently? We look like very formal, very like from talking like from very big companies. So how can we adjust ourselves to be more comfortable with these different opportunities if they want to interview us?
I'll share an anecdote with you. You have no idea how much your question resonates with my own experience. I talked to you just before about creating my own company and going after private equity funding. I flew to London many years ago and had an early morning meeting in a typically British a gentleman's club. I arrived in a beautiful blue suit, a nice shirt, nice shoes and so on. I came in, but I wasn't wearing a tie. And the gentleman at the reception said, "Sir, you have to wear a tie. We can give you one if you didn't bring one." So no, fine, I have a tie. So I put on my tie and I looked fantastic. I had a conversation with the investor, and an hour later I had another investors meeting at a startup incubator. So I came in with my blue suit, my white shirt, my tie, and everybody was wearing shorts and t-shirts. So the first thing I did was I took off everything that I had. It's not easy. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you understand whom are you seeing, what type of person is that. Maybe you find photos of the person on the internet. Is he a more casual person? Is he a more formal person? You can call the company, say, by the way, I have an interview with the CEO of your company on Monday, as you might know. I'd just like to get informed about the dress code. So the more information you get, the easier it will be for you to kind of create the right kind of leveling as you move into the company. It's all about preparation. You prepare your stories, but you also prepare how to get there, whom you will see. Are there any anecdotes you find about the person, the dress code, all that stuff? Because ultimately, again, I'm repeating myself for the X time, it's a sales process. You need to be not perfectly fitting to this job in absolute terms. You need to fit better in relative terms compared to the other competitors. And that's what makes it difficult, because you don't know who these people are. The only person you can influence, the only person's role that you can up is yours. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Regarding the dress code, I mean, even if I look at the photographs in the internet and I see, or the Instagram, and I see that the interviewer is wearing a t-shirt and shorts 70% of his leisure time, how can it influence my dress code for the company? What can I learn from that?
So typically, the smaller the companies are that you apply for, the more décontracté, the more casual they are. To be perfectly honest, there are only a few industries left where a real formal attire is seen. I work typically out of Zurich, so on Bahnhofstrasse in Zurich, there you still see a lot of ties. But I mean, in FMCG industries, in manufacturing industries, in many of the service-dominated industries, you don't see ties. On the other hand, if you go to McKinsey, Boston Consulting, you still see them. So I guess it depends on whom you're, what company you're planning to interview with, and whom you will see there. And again, my argument would be, if you are unsure, call. Nobody's going to say, "Ha, Carsten is a really, really, really great candidate, but he called us to ask whether we wear a tie or not." They're not going to do that. Again, as I said, they will not say, "We can't hire him because he didn't or he did wear a tie." But it's my problem, because I will feel uncomfortable if I feel that I'm underdressed or overdressed. Call.
What about women?
Same thing. Same thing.
I mean, you would come with a jacket, you would come with a very expensive bag, you would come with a little computer bag. Like, what should women wear under such circumstances? Men wear a tie or a jacket or don't, but women, they won't come with jeans.
So jeans, I think, is never really a good idea. I mean, unless you are a serial founder and you go into an incubator and you talk to startups, the jeans is fine. You might even have to have holes in the jeans to fit. So what I would try and do is, because you're asking a few things here. You're asking about the bags and the brands and so on. So let's say if you have the latest Gucci bags and the latest Hermes shoes and whatever, it's probably not the right environment in an interview to showcase that you just bought a new pair of shoes for 1,200 euro. So I think a nice, clean, well-stated attire is good. Again, I would call them if you're unsure, but an interview is not the place to showcase all the stuff that you have in your wardrobe. Does it help, Yael?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Good.
Carsten, can I ask a question?
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Hi, it's Annetta again. Just from an employer's point of view, what would your advice be, given that, say, okay, I've been let go from a fairly senior position. Well, my job titles appear that I'm like global reward manager, etc. And the question is often, you know, what are you looking for? What is the next step in your career? And my honest opinion is that I don't necessarily need to be the head of. I'm quite happy to report to somebody, because normally what I'm interviewing for is where I will be reporting to somebody else, and I won't be the head of as I have been. So for me to actually say that, you know, it's not necessary for me to be the head of the department, and I'm quite happy to use my skills and work in the environment. How is that viewed, or how would you suggest I position that?
Remember I said that I would never give an answer to a question that wasn't put forward to me? My question to you would be, what's the question that somebody would ask you to trigger this kind of answer?
So they would ask something like, well, what are your career aspirations? Where do you see yourself going? Or you do realize that the position that will be reporting to the global head, and you've been the global head previously.
Yep. Okay. So I'm going to try and give a couple of ideal typical answers. Let's see if any of those resonate with you. If you are moving from one big company to another big company, and you used to be the head of, and now this is the second in command, one answer could be, well, I'm aware of the fact that this is actually a second in command. Yes, it's true. I used to be the first in line. But I have reached a level in my career where I've proven myself. I know what I'm doing. I'm happy to provide my insights and experience, and I'm totally fine with being in a second line position. Going forward, I'm planning for the long term. I would be available for succession planning if that occurs. Otherwise, I would be more than happy to stay in this position for the long run. That could be one way of saying it.
Thanks. Yeah, that's the sort of answer I've been given, but I'm just wondering if it's being seen as, oh, well, she's not very ambitious, we don't want to hire somebody like that.
No, so I think it depends on not just what you say, but how you say it. So it has to be, again, we talked about authenticity. It needs to feel like you mean it. So let's think of an alternative way to give an answer to this question. Okay, let me try another one, which is a bit more humble, maybe. Yes, I know that this is a second in line position. I know that the head of positions in the industry that I'm applying for, such your industry, are currently taken. Overall, the positions in Switzerland are shrinking. I'm well aware of that there's pressure on these positions. And plus, there's enough to be done in the second in command position, so I'm totally fine with it. So what I'm trying to do here, and maybe my answer is not as, let's say, linguistically perfect as I would want it to be. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to weave in geopolitical changes, or let's say market trends, market tendencies that have an impact on the position. So this could be another way of doing it.
Thanks very much. It's very helpful.
Okay. May I suggest, or may I offer, that we'll do a role play now. So I need at least one, or maybe two or three volunteers that go through, let's say, a 5, 6, 7 minute mock interview with me, whereby I will ask some of those nasty questions. Everything that one of you who will mimic the candidate will say, of course, will stay in this virtual realm. We will not use this against you. Having said that, by the way, maybe I should say that we are recording this session. Maybe I should have said that in the beginning. I apologize for that. We can role play this now, and I think this is a fantastic learning opportunity for the candidate who's doing this with me, but also for everybody else who's listening. So as we haven't planned this, and there's no nobody who has come forward so far, I'm going to ask into the virtual group who would like to break the ice and who would like to do this mock interview with me. I do need a volunteer.
Why not?
Why not as who?
Frédéric.
Frédéric, thank you. That is really cool. Thank you. I know how difficult this is to be the icebreaker.
Let's see how cool it is.
Okay, so what I would like all of us to do, give Frédéric the total attention, listen to what he says, try and pick up on the energy and the emotional reaction that he triggers in you. And if you see him on video, also look at what you see in terms of facial expression and body language. And then we'll provide feedback because we want Frédéric to learn from it and grow. Just a moment, I have to prepare my my iPad. Okay, can we start?
Let's go.
Let's go. Thank you, Frédéric, for joining the interview. I'm excited to get to know you a bit more in person. Could we start the interview by you introducing yourself to me, maybe in, let's say, 6 or 7 sentences, and then I have a couple of questions that I'd like to run by you.
Sure. Thank you, Carsten. That's my pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to have this discussion with you today. In a few sentences, then I will introduce myself. I'm an experienced sales executive. I have 12 years of experience within the chemical industry. I'm trilingual. I have been working in the emerging market quite a lot. I've been based in Germany over the last 5 years. And after having taken the decision to go for a sabbatical over the last 8 months, I went back to Switzerland, and I'm now in a, let's say, career transition time.
Thank you very much. Sabbatical, that's something that I haven't heard in a long time. What made you choose a sabbatical?
I have a long, I had a dream. I'm a big biking fan, and I'm a big fan of Africa. And I had a dream to link that together. And therefore I decided in 2019 to cross Africa on a bike. And I linked that to supporting education in Africa. Therefore I built my own website. I was doing like some blogging to raise some funds for NGO, which is with supporting education in the continent.
Fascinating. What a cool story. Could you share with me what you learned in these 8 months about yourself that you didn't know before?
I guess that I discovered that I have maybe even more resources that I saw or that I believed, because it was, I mean, there has been some days that have been really rough and where you really have to push yourself and to show some extremely high level of resistance and resilience, I would say. I realized how interested I am by helping others, by discovering other culture, by getting in contact with other human beings, other culture, and so on. I would say that's really some of the key points that I discovered during that time.
Very good. If I may move back to the, let's say, the professional realm, could you share with me the one big thing that you are most proud of in your career to date?
To be honest, there's a few of them. Therefore, it's not always that easy to choose the one big thing. I would say that one thing that I'm very, very proud of Or do you have a preference, like something based on customer contact or on?
Just give me the one thing where you, let's say, in the context of today's conversation, that you feel is most relevant.
Okay, as we are here in a sales position, and I will use the example of my time as I was heading the African market for the company I was working for. I've been heading this African market for 6 years. And one thing that I'm very proud of is that during these 6 years, despite working with extremely challenging market, I mean, Africa is not as easy as Germany or being in Western Europe. I can proudly say that I never lost, no, that's not true, but I lost 10,000 euro based on 160 million sales per year roundabout. And that's something that I'm extremely proud of. Why? It's because that was due to how well I could read my customer, how well I could know my customer. It's showing as well that I know when to say no. For me, your sales is only good when you get the money at the end and so on. Therefore, I refuse quite some deals, but I can now come back with this very nice clean sheet saying I haven't lost any money, and I'm very proud of that, because on the same time, I grew the business by 20 to 30%, which was definitely above the market trend.
How big was the market development in comparison?
Around 8-9% per annum, and reached 20.
Why were you so significantly above the market?
I think that the reason is that when I get the job, there was a lot to do for my company. We're very little present in Africa, and we've been one of the only major chemical company that decided to really go into the African market. The rest of the market was taken by a lot of traders and suppliers that were not so reliable. And we really changed the game. We showed to the African market that we will be reliable, that we will not be spot supplier, that we will really be strong partner, and really show this partnership in what we did. And that helped us, even though we're not undercutting prices, we're even having higher prices, but it really helped us tremendously to grow our customer base way above market growth.
Understood. So if this was your highlight, and thank you for sharing it, what was your low light?
My low light. I would say most likely in an exposition when I get a project to lead. I was leading a customer segmentation project. And the low light in that we did a customer segmentation, which I think it was a very wise way of doing. I will not go too much into the details, but we resegment all the customers and so on, as I was in Germany and so on. Nevertheless, the low light for me is that despite the fact that I think we did a really good job, we never really managed to implement it. In fact, people were not following it that much and so on. Therefore, like 2 years after that, gone for another customer segmentation. And when I received the project, I said, it's not going to be one other customer segmentation, it's going to be the customer segmentation. And that did not really went through.
What did you learn from that process?
I learned from that process that we should most likely have, even though we involve quite a lot of the, let's say, the lower level, like the technician, the lab technician and so on, that are very important in this project. We should have involved them even more and really get them on board, maybe have some of them into the project team since the beginning. That's the biggest part that I learned, is that making something for senior management or top management is nice, but if you don't get the buy-in, the really strong buy-in from the base, it's really hard to implement such a project.
Mm-hmm. So what would you do differently if you had the same chance again?
Well, I think that I will really I will get some additional person from the technical side, additional really working person and so on, the person that gonna have to live with this segmentation later on. And I will not just take them to get their opinion, but I really involve them into the project since the beginning and have them as, how can I say that? Some influencer, if you allow me to use this kind of word, influencer to influence their colleagues and the other person in the organization. That's what I would do differently.
Okay. Maybe one more question at this point. If I were to ask you about a piece of feedback that you received from somebody, either because you asked for it or because somebody just gave it to you, and as a consequence of that feedback you changed your behavior, what would that be?
That's an interesting question, Carsten. Never heard this one, but that's a really interesting one. I would say that I received from one of my people. I'm a very extrovert person. I'm usually speaking out loud and giving my opinion very, very strongly. And as I move into a management committee position, I received from a senior person really the advice to maybe think a bit more about what I'm going to say and maybe not be too much political, because it's maybe not the best, but just to consider and let's say, I mean, it's a bit of an easy one, but like think twice before expressing your opinion and so on, and keep some of your opinion for yourself and so on. And that I changed a bit in my career. That's something that was someone that I was really looking for, and I really take his comment as a highly valuable one.
Thank you, Frederick. Let's cut here.
Thank you, Carsten.
How do you feel?
Not too bad. I feel that I completely forgot to ask you the back question, this loop. But otherwise, I don't feel too bad. I'm looking forward to hear what you said or what the other guys are saying.
Before we ask the others, you know that an interview only has two possible outcomes. Yes, I want to continue with him. No, I don't want to continue with him. What do you think I feel and why?
I would guess that yes. I think that the sabbatical interests you quite a lot. That's something that speaks to you. That's my thing. It was, oh wow, went to Africa and so on. That's something out of the beaten track, and I like that. That's my feeling. And I think that my answer, let's be a bit self-confident for once, were not bad. Therefore, I think that you would rather say, let's keep on the process.
Very good. Let's ask the group. What did you see? What did you feel? What did you hear that you liked? What feedback would you give? What things would you recommend that Frederick changed?
Hi, Frederick. It's Monica speaking. I really liked a lot your interview. Very energetic, self-confident, and never stressed I mean, at least that was my impression. You didn't give the impression of being stressed or being in an uncomfortable situation with the question that Carsten has asked you. And if I was the recruitment manager, I would say, yes, we want him.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
May I give some suggestion?
Sure.
So my impression is, okay, this is quite a passionate sales guy, sales manager. He has been very adventurous, and he has a lot of courage, and he's very honest, direct, etc. So, the impression of by interview is very positive, because you have this very willingness to contact, to be truly yourself. Couple of how to say, that one suggestion is that when you talk about yourself, you could have been a little bit more structure. That means you could make your sentence a little bit shorter, or you make your story brief in the beginning before you go into details. You could improve a little bit impression, because I feel like, okay, this is sales manager, a lot of passion, etc. But he has a little more strategic thinking. He's more structured. Is he able to lead the team? Is he have a good planning? You give me an impression a little bit intuitive, but less structured. And regarding the question Carsten asked you, what would be the negative feedback you received?
Thank you very much.
What would be the negative feedback you will get from your peers? And this is a very dangerous question, very, very dangerous question. I would say it's very difficult to answer. You seem to be not prepared. So if you're not prepared, you should prepare now. I would say, if you said, okay, they ask me think twice before I comment, wow, that's very negative. If you're 25 years old, I wouldn't think it's negative. You are probably now looking for a job which in a management position, which you lead a team, and you really had to know what do you want to say in front of people. So this is very negative. You should think about something else. Like, for example, you could say, people think I'm really too much energy, I'm over-energetic, and some of my team members complain that we should not overwork. We should not overwork so much, or we should little bit more balance, have a little bit more balance between our job and our life. I think this is something I need to improve, and this is definitely much negative than the one you put in your interview.
Okay.
So
can I just ask you, Karsten, before, because I found very interesting. Thanks a lot, Xinian, is that?
Yes.
Thanks a lot for the feedback. It's always great to get constructive feedback like that. For me, then, I would ask, because you ask me within my career, you don't ask me within the last years and so on, and that's something that I get rather at the beginning of my career. The example that you gave, Xinian, for me is, sorry if I speak, sorry for my French, it's a little bit this bullshit big answer. It's like, what are your worst quality? Oh, I'm working too hard and this kind of stuff. What would be your recommendation, Karsten, on this question?
Yeah. So.
Sorry. My recommendation is there's no negative. You know, you need to see your positive and treat your positive respect as a negative, but there's no negative points.
So what I would do, and again, this is a tough question, and it a couple of thoughts that are circulating in my mind. So first of all, the persona that I saw, that I heard, and that I felt on this video chat was structured, to the point, had quite an interesting private experience in Africa, and a very substantive professional P&L related success under his belt. So you came across as a seasoned, poised executive in the sales environment. Under that umbrella, or in that context, your answer to the question, what feedback did you implement into the behavior change, actually made you appear, in my view, even more authentic. Yes, it is somewhat of a slippery slope to talk about that people say you should think first and be more political. But then again, it fits to what I felt as the persona talking to me on this video chat. Let's say in old times, the question, this type of question would have come in a different shape or form. People would have asked, what are your strengths and weaknesses, for instance? And it's important to make sure that, to your point, that you don't play along with this, excuse my French, the bullshit bingo. Because everybody says I'm overly perfect. I mean, a couple of these typical answers. So if you have this ability to come across in a poised manner, if you have a very strong professional success story under your belt, like those 160 million, 20 to 30% increase in revenue versus 8 to 20% of the market. So significantly above market, presenting yourself as an overachiever, as an authentic, as a, let's say, a person who even takes a sabbatical to cycle across Africa. I think this all makes sense. In other cases, I would have probably given Xinian my d'accord. I would have probably said it's very difficult, it's dangerous or slippery. But in your case, I thought it was very, very convincing. Did that help, Frederick?
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe just because I want to do a few more interviews, I'll just give you what I thought. I did share already that I thought it was very convincing. Yes, I would like to work with you, or to have you come into the second phase of interviews. there's a concept that interviewers call, hang on, I'm just going to try and draw something. Let's see if you can see it. Just a moment. I don't know whether you have heard about this concept of a funneling technique. What I'm drawing here is the attempt of a kitchen funnel. And you might see level 1, level 2, and level 3 on the screen.
Yes.
So what this funneling technique does is the interviewer asks a level 1 question, gets a level 1 answer, takes something of the level 1 answer, formulates a level 2 question out of that, takes something from the level 2 answer, formulates a level 3 question, and then it gets a level 3 answer. By the time I go down to level 3 with my question and get a level 3 answer, even if we're talking about astrophysics or stuff that I have bloody no clue about, I can judge as an interviewer whether what the candidate did makes sense or no. So I'm sharing this with you because what Frederick did, probably unintentionally, you opened, let's say, the funnel to lead me into level 2, level 3 about your sabbatical. And of course, I followed your lead. I went down. And what I got as an answer only convinced me of the substance you had. It was a completely coherent story. What I was actually expecting is that you camouflaged your loss of a position with a voluntary sabbatical situation where you basically just stayed at home and looked for a job. That's what I was expecting. But the story in Africa was extremely convincing. But why is this funneling technique also important? The interviewer will not be able to go down to level 3 with every question because the interview doesn't have enough time. They will maybe, if they know this technique, they will do this once or twice. And what they will do is to see if on level 3, the answer is even is as rock solid as the answer on level 1. It could be though that on level 3 you had just shot yourself in your own foot, and I'm going to give you an example. I'm telling you this because I want you to make sure that your stories, your success stories, not only sound cool and convincing on level 1, but they actually withhold pushback on level 2 and withhold pushback on level 3. I'll give you an example of how this should not be. Okay. So a don't. The question is, could you give me an example of where you initiated change? Aha, I'm thinking level 1. I know a success story, and my success story is as follows. In 2015, I took over the role as marketing head for Central Switzerland. At that time, we were losing 2% market share. I created a cross-functional team, and we designed a new go-to-market strategy, and I presented this to my boss, who loved it. Level 1. If the interviewer now moves on to another question, he thinks, great story, makes a lot of sense, the boss loved it, all fine. If now the interviewer goes down to level 2 and says, so Carsten, tell me, what did your boss then do with the information that you gave him? Then I will be forced to give a level 2 answer. I will say, well, I was proud to then be given the chance to present this finding to my boss's boss and his direct reports. And we had a great conversation and they totally endorsed it. Full stop. If the interview goes on, it will sound good or convincing. If he drills further, well, let's see. Level 3 question. Carsten, so what happened then after you had presented it to the boss, to your boss's boss? Well, I even got an opportunity to present this to the management board, but they stopped it. So the question was, could you give an example of where you initiated change? On level 1, it sounds like initiating change. On level 2, it sounds like initiating change. On level 3, people will realize there was no initiating change. Actually, the people stopped it.